Well, it looks like, well, I was waiting for the, all right. All right. Well, I was waiting for the University of Utah announcement, and it looks like they're playing it before the top of the hour. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, and welcome to the K Talk audience at AM 1640 this Monday morning. And as you will probably know by now, I am doing this show just 1 hour a week. Monday and Tuesday. The health show will still be 2 hours on Wednesday. But I just have so many things going on. I mean, I'm only 74. I'm about to turn 75. And I still have so many things to do. And the time required is just taking time from everything else. All right, the big thing this morning, and there were a lot of big things, hour by hour over the weekend, but the big thing this morning, last Friday, Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, as you heard there at the top of the hour news, released over 100 pages of previously classified documents, which provide evidence of what she called a treasonous conspiracy. She uses the word treason, a treasonous conspiracy to subvert the will of the American people. In releasing this report, she denounced the promotion of the Russiagate story by intelligence officials as narrative building rather than intelligence gathering. So this obsessive swirl of coverage of this renewed flap over Jeffrey Epstein and the Trump MAGA split over that case has left little room for mainstream media to cover what Tulsi Gabbard is talking about. Nonetheless, it is exploding on social media. In her official DNI X feed, Gabbard posts a series of devastating infographics with the timeline showing that on August 31st, September 9th, and December 7th, the intelligence community had determined that Russia had neither the capacity nor the intention to hack the 2016 election infrastructure, and included this assessment in a December 8th, 2016 presidential daily brief, which was then withheld from President Obama on orders of then DNI James Clapper's office, as instructed in a memo that said this: based on some new guidance, we are going to push back publication of the president's daily briefing. It will not run tomorrow and is not likely to run until next week. Now, this is 2016. Now, he was elected in November. Trump was elected in November of 2016. And these are publications that she, Tulsi Gabbard, director of the National Intelligence, just published on X, the documents themselves. I'm going to name these people here in a few minutes. I wonder if they're wanting to extend their summer vacations outside the jurisdictional areas of the United States. So the very following day, December 9th, and Obama was still the president. Trump was elected, Obama was still the president. The White House meeting was convened in which the CIA Director Brennan and the FBI Director Comey and DNI Director Clapper, then National Security Advisor Susan Rice, Secretary of State John Kerry, Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland, and others, where these people got together with Obama in the White House, December 9th. The president had a mere, 6 weeks left of his presidency. And what were they doing? They had already learned at this point in time that Russia did not have the technology nor the capability of interfering with the 2016 elections, even before the Russiagate story got off ground. So according to Gabbard, in this meeting that had these major people, which Gabbard is now describing as a treasonous conspiracy. Wow. This is what she said. Obama directed the intelligence community to create a new intelligence assessment that detailed Russian election meddling, even though it would contradict multiple intelligence assessments released over the previous several months. Now, is that how you define treason? They can't do anything about Trump being elected now. They're scared to death of what he's going to do because he's just going to go clean the swamp or drain the swamp, which is about as possible as draining the Pacific Ocean. You're not going to drain the swamp. As we have learned in the first 6 months of the president's administration, the swamp is far more powerful than he is. However, to come out with this kind of information now, so Clapper's DNI office scrambled to piece together a new assessment, which was released January 6th, 2017, while Obama was still in office, which opened the door to the lying Russiagate story, which dominated Trump's first term. So in a statement on the release of the declassified documents on the assessment of Russian interference, Gabbard said this intelligence was weaponized. It was used as a justification for endless smears, for sanctions from Congress, and for covert investigations. She said when key internal assessments found that Russia did not impact recent U.S. election results, those findings were suppressed. Is that treasonous behavior? She said for months before the 2016 election, the intelligence community maintained that Russia lacked both the intent and capability. But once President Trump won, everything changed, she said. So the little coverage which appeared as of the early morning issues of the New York Times and the Washington Post papers, which were awarded Pulitzer Prizes for their fabricated stories at the heart of Russiagate, was dwarfed by multiple articles on the Epstein imbroglio. Did you notice that? Now Epstein is an issue again. Epstein, I guarantee you, is going to become an even bigger issue to cloud out this report that I just gave you regarding this treasonous behavior on the part of the intelligence community in the summer of 2016, leading up to Trump's successful election, and the behavior of this group led by President Obama. I don't know that it was instigated by him, but it was certainly at this point from January 6th, interestingly enough, on of 2017, menu for the daily operation. And now, the coverage in, I was reading RT's account of this morning, points to why the mainstream U.S. press has so far limited its coverage in accusing Gabbard of ignoring the evidence of Russian intervention produced by the intel community against Putin and Trump. The declassified documents could lead to charges against Brennan and Clapper and key Obama intel officials who were involved in the fake findings, as well as other top officials in the intelligence community and FBI, even up to Obama. Now, this recent Supreme Court decision here, earlier this summer or late spring, when they finally decided the president can do no wrong, And I know I'm exaggerating, backdated it. I mean, even to the point where Biden is going to get away with some of his behavior, especially regarding Ukraine and the Gazprom and the stuff that took place with his son in the Ukraine. I wonder if that would include Obama. They have the documents. What, weren't there shredders? You know, I could understand that these documents existed because people want their butts covered when they start doing treasonous behavior, so that they have documents showing that they were ordered by superior personnel to do the things that they're doing. There's a great Clancy movie, The Clear and Present Danger, where that kind of written excuse is highlighted in that movie. A movie I highly suggest, by the way. So, did you hear the names I mentioned? Director Brennan of the CIA, Comey of the FBI, Clapper of the DNI, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, Secretary of State John Kerry, Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland, who was one of the principal people responsible for the 1 million dead Ukrainian soldiers. And there were others of lesser light. And then she says Obama directed the intelligence community to create a new intelligence assessment that detailed Russian election meddling, even though it contradicted multiple intelligence assessments released over the previous several months. And then on January 6th, 2017, which opened the door to the lying Russiagate story. Is treason enough? Is that enough of a discussion? What's the definition of treason? Well, you know. All right, a couple of things about Zelensky I want to mention here. Seymour Hersh, a very respected journalist, one of the few journalists left. I consider Tucker Carlson a journalist, and there are several people on Substack, Greenwald, of course, and several others. Those who write for antiwar.com I consider to be journalists. Well, Hersh had an article that came out Friday, and he is saying that Zelensky's on his way out, which Hersh had been told. He said, I've been told by knowledgeable officials in Washington that Zelensky is on a short list for exile. If President Donald Trump decides to make the call, favored to replace him, of course, is Zelensky, the former chief of Ukraine's armed forces and currently Ukraine's ambassador to London. So Hersh writes further that if Zelensky refuses to leave office, as is most likely, an involved U.S. official told Hersh, he's going to go by force. The ball is in his court. So there's a lot in Washington and Ukraine who believe that the escalating air war with Russia must end soon, while there's still a chance to make a settlement with President Putin. Now, what's important to understand here is that while the Russian forces continue to advance in eastern Ukraine toward the Dnieper River, they aren't concentrating so much anymore, since they have complete control of the air over the Ukraine, the airways, the Russians do, that they're using bombardment now. It's not so much soldier-to-soldier confrontation on the battlefield. They're using bombardment. They're chasing down the Ukrainian soldiers with drones, and because they can produce artillery anywhere from 12 to 15 times faster than the United States or the United European military community. Russia has all of this stuff to expend to hurry up and get this damn thing over with. And that might be one of the reasons why Trump gave this 50-day notice to Russia. You're going to sit down and talk to us, or you're just not going to like what's going to happen. So there's indications that Zelensky knows what's coming. He has just shifted or fired 3 officials, his Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, and the Ambassador to the United States. And as the U.S. official that I was referring to there earlier told Hirsch, Zelensky is beginning to read the danger signs, finally. So what happens next, the official said, in terms of political violence inside of Kyiv and elsewhere, depends largely on the degree to which its population has reached the point where they have no other choice. Zelensky will not go willingly, then he'll have to go feet first. This is what they're saying in the Ukraine. And herein lies the U.S. internal debate. Smart Side says that Ukrainians sort it out by themselves and not get the CIA involved to seal the deal. And so far, good sense drives the policy, but some unnamed leaders are impatient and that this will take time, more than the 50 days that Trump has laid down for Putin. So Hirsch admits that he doesn't know what Trump's view on all of these things are, of course, leaving unanswered the question of whose policy it is to remove Zelensky. And as far as President Trump's intent or view, well, it depends on the day. His view on Zelensky and Putin today might not be the same as it is tomorrow or this time next week, as it is constantly changing all the time. And what we get out of President Trump, more often than not anymore, are threats to do this and threats to do that. But I think Trump finally is beginning to understand that he's been given some very, very bad advice regarding Russia, Ukraine, the reason for the special military operation, and the fact that while several people have gone to talk to Putin or Lavrov, including Rubio and Witkoff, the Russian position remains unmoved. They're not going to negotiate. They won, and they're winning the last battles that exist in the Ukraine to stomping out any last bit of resistance to their efforts to secure peace and safety for the ethnic Russians living in eastern Ukraine. And you all know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So Hirsch admits that while he doesn't know what Trump's view is, he still, from the inside information he's been giving, Trump is ready to get rid of Zelensky, like it's Trump's decision. Anyway, Scott Ritter, in a post on Telegram, said that he considered the removal of Zelensky as one possible reason for Trump's giving Putin a 50-day deadline, because it may take 50 days to get rid of Zelensky. So Scott Ritter had an interview with Diane Sayre at this recent symposium by the Schiller Institute. And Ritter said that Trump had reached an impasse in his Ukraine-Russia negotiations and wanted a pause to reset. So you know who Scott Ritter is. He doesn't hold anything back any more than McGregor or Larry Johnson or Ray McGovern or Gilbert Doctorow or Alistair Crook, or a lot of the Aaron Mate, the rest of Napolitano's lineup. But that's interesting. Ritter says Trump has reached an impasse in his Ukraine-Russia negotiations. What does that mean? It means that Russia is not going to back down. Ukraine has to demilitarize right down to the last grenade. The Nazis who run the Kyiv regime have got to be removed. Ukraine will not become a part of NATO. And there will be no other military presence from foreign nations in the Ukraine, or the Russian army will continue to move westward. And when you have won the battle, and essentially now the war, it's not like you're going to sit there and do a little give and take, because you're not going to allow any kind of a situation to arise that could recreate what you've been fighting and have lost tens of thousands of your own soldiers over. Because Moscow sees NATO gearing up for war against Russia. What Moscow sees in NATO is the alliance building up for this offensive war. Now, this is from Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko, told students and teachers at the Altai State University. He said this: all military construction has only one goal: to create military superiority in all theaters, to create real military threats to the Russian Federation, and in fact, to prepare the military structure, the NATO-EU military machine, for a military clash with Russia. Well, they're not fooling anybody. So this recent NATO summit, that's actually the bottom line, where the member states have decided to increase their military spending to 5% of their GDP that Trump was pushing. And he said earlier that NATO and the EU saw Russia as a direct immediate threat, but now they're considering it a long-term threat. Now, why? Why, in all the push to militarize the Ukraine as much as they possibly can, for this ongoing battle to defeat Russia, to weaken Russia, so the West can move in and break Russia into a dozen different ethnic groups, then let them fight against each other and decrease their through the attrition that would cause. Nobody left to defend their natural resources when Western corporations moved in. I mean, this is the essence of the British Empire. This is how they work. So why would they describe Russia from an immediate threat to a long-term threat, which is the verbiage they're using? To build a military machine, because they have a time lag threshold for achieving these 5% military spending for GDP in 2035, another 10 years. And this is why no matter what happens in the Ukraine, peace will be established, an agreement will be signed, Russia will still be considered a long-term threat. Even though all hostilities cease, the Russian army retreats, they'll still consider Russia a long-term threat, using the 5% to build up a military strong enough 10 years from now to literally attack Russia. And we've learned from Napoleon and we've learned from Hitler, when you have an overwhelming army, what happens when you attack Russia? So Grushko, talking to these students, stressed that Ukraine, in the eyes of the West, is an instrument of fighting the Russian Federation to inflict a strategic defeat on it, or as they say now, exhaustion with real hot theater of military operations. He also pointed out that part of the hybrid war unleashed against Russia is an information campaign that probably has never been seen in the history of mankind, such demonization when any hostile intentions are directed toward Russia. He says, so they say that Russia will definitely attack, and it's not about whether it will attack or not, it is when it will, in 5 years, 3 years, 8 years, and how will it do it? Will it cut off the Suwalki Gap, or the Danes suddenly decide that Russia would probably land troops on Bornholm? And Bornholm, of course, was the island that was liberated by the Red Army from the Nazis, which stayed there for several months, and then the island was handed back over to the Danes after the Red Army evacuated. Says that this, in reality, is in which we have to exist. All right, looks like there is uh, some interrupt playing at K-Talk right now. So for those of you on the stream, welcome. Glad to have you here this morning. I hope I present something for you interestingly enough to listen to. Because the main thing of this morning, for Pete's sake, is these Gabbard revelations. And the Democrats right now are freaking. Even the Democrats are even bringing forward information to revitalize the Epstein case, because they want every last piece of information that could possibly implicate them removed from the scene. Is just, just lies upon lies upon lies. The truth will always find you out. What is the Old Testament saying? The wicked flee when no one pursueth, or something like that. Well, when the Director of National Intelligence comes out and tells President Trump, like she did several months ago, that there is no active bomb building going on in Iran, and the president is confronted with that information on Air Force One, flying to Europe or coming back from Europe, whatever. And he says, I don't care what she said. We're going to bomb Iran. Twice, she said, all of our intelligence shows that they're not building a bomb. The president says, I don't care what she says. Now she comes out Friday and says, we have this absolute wasp nest, she didn't use those words, of treasonous behavior that involved narrative building, not intelligence gathering. And then she names the principles. Now, will the president say, I don't care what she says? Will the president just drop this? I mean, who's he going up against if he were to pursue investigation into what was behind Russiagate? The leaders of the Justice Department, the leaders of the intelligence community, the leaders of State Department, as early as November and December of 2016, and then into January of 2017, following the command of the President Obama, knowing the information is not reliable, to go ahead and pursue Russiagate to destroy the president's administration as best they could. And they did a good job. Now, Virginia Senator Mark Warner, not state, and Connecticut Representative Jim Himes appear to have been nominated by the rogue U.S. United Kingdom intelligence agencies to push back against National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard's damning revelations about the fraudulent narrative promoted by the outgoing Obama administration, attributing Hillary Clinton's defeat to Russia meddling in the 2016 U.S. election. Already, they're doing what they can. The Democrats are striking back. Mark Warner from Virginia and Jim Himes from Connecticut. And the problem they have, which I think they're going to hope that no one notices, is that Gabbard's DNI documents show that on December 9th, 2016, a meeting took place at the Obama White House that I referred to in the earlier part of this show, where President Obama himself gave the orders to create a narrative which contracted 3 earlier intelligence assessments that there was no Russia cyber attack of election infrastructure. I can imagine them sitting there, all these leaders that he had appointed into those positions, and he's holding up a sheet of paper in front of him. Here are 3 relatively reliable intelligence reports that it was impossible for the Russians to have messed up the 2016 election. And then, for the benefit of my streamers, he just did this. Wrapped up the paper and threw it in the trash can. We're not going to pay any attention to these very reliable intelligence reports that Russia was incapable of messing up the election. So what do you call willful fraud to undermine the incoming president of the United States and to put the nation flat out on a trajectory toward nuclear war based on lies? How do you describe that kind of behavior? So present at this meeting, I mentioned it earlier, I want to mention it again because these aren't minor players. CIA Director John Brennan, FBI Director James Comey, DNI Director James Clapper, Secretary of State John Kerry, Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland, then recently appointed National Security Advisor Susan Rice, the UN Ambassador, and others. Senator Warner's statement is the more rabid, and it reads this. It seems DNI Gabbard is unaware that the years-long Russia investigation carried out by the Senate Intelligence Committee reaffirmed the Russian government directed extensive activity against U.S. election infrastructure ahead of the 2016 election, and that it used social media to conduct an information warfare campaign in order to benefit Donald Trump. This conclusion was supported on a unanimous basis by every single Democrat and Republican on the committee. It is sadly not surprising that DNI Gabbard, who promised to depoliticize the intelligence community, is once again weaponizing her position to amplify the president's election conspiracy theories. It is appalling to hear DNI Gabbard accuse her own intelligence community workforce of committing a treasonous conspiracy when she was unwilling to label Edward Snowden a traitor. Excuse me. Wow. So she comes out last Friday. Hundreds of documents involving the president and his top security, intelligence, Justice Department people in an Oval Office meeting to throw out the 3 previous reports that said that Russia didn't do it, and instead constructed a narrative that said that they did. And then this ass of a senator, Mark Warner, from my home state of Virginia, comes out and says she's obviously not aware of the Senate Intelligence Committee that said Russia did involve themselves in messing up and ruining Hillary Clinton's campaign. And that every member, Democrat and Republican, voted for that opinion by the Senate Intelligence Committee. I think it should be noted that Warner was the ranking delegate or Democrat on the 116th Congress Select Committee on Intelligence, and that his insane comments celebrating the June 1 Ukrainian attacks on the UN or Russian military bases shouldn't be ignored or left out of anyone's assessment as to where Warner actually stands in all of this. So Congressman Himes, appearing yesterday on CBS Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, takes a more sophistical approach, known by some of them as if you can't convince them of the truth, baffle them with your BS. So Margaret Brennan said this. The director of the intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, has said that she is referring for prosecution former American officials she accused of treasonous conspiracy, a years-long coup against President Trump, because they assessed Russia had tried to influence the election. This is weeks after the CIA director issued a report critiquing the tradecraft that went into that 2016 assessment. She said, "Is there any legal basis for any kind of prosecution here?" Meaning, Gabbard has turned this stuff over to the Justice Department for prosecution of treason. She says to Congress or Senator Himes, is there any, after everything we've talked about, do you think there's any legal basis for this kind of prosecution? Himes said this, none, absolutely none, Margaret. What you saw from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was not just a lie, but a very dangerous lie. Because when you start throwing around language like sedition and treason, somebody is going to get hurt. You think? Now, it's not that she's just expressing opinions, Tulsi Gabbard. She has the documents, hundreds of documents, and she's turning them all over to the Justice Department. Now, hopefully, when they get stacked up on Attorney General Bond's desk, they don't disappear a week later so that they can say, oh, there were no documents. Yeah, I hear you. Somebody's hungry. So Himes says it's a lie. What she's saying is a lie. Now, who's he saying that to? Well, the audience of Meet the Press. Margaret Brennan has a certain reputation, and kind of falls into how stupid do they think we are? We don't, the average American doesn't seem to remember anything past 2 weeks. And most Americans are intellectually lazy. That's my experience. It's difficult to find somebody who really will spend the time to research this stuff. Now, I want to get back to some more of the discussion here. Now, you pointed out that in the Senate committee, then led by Marco Rubio, a Republican and now Secretary of State, found unanimously that Russia meddled in the election to try to assist Donald Trump. John Durham, special counsel appointed by Donald Trump, investigated this, and they found the Senate report was correct. Now, what Tulsi is doing is a little sleight of hand, but it's worth focusing on, says Himes. She is saying that the Intelligence Committee early on said that the Russians could not use cyber tools to mess with the voting infrastructure, the machines that tally our votes. And that was true then, and it's true now, though the Russians tried to break into a couple of states, election technical infrastructure. They didn't do it, but it's well known and well established that the Russians hacked into the DNC and undertook any number of other influence operations, including buying reams of Facebook ads to discredit Hillary Clinton. That is not in contention, right? Brennan is asking Himes.
That's nice.
So Himes says, and what is horrifying about all of this lie out of Gabbard is, number one, it puts people at risk. Right now, the mouth breathers on MAGA are just going out of their minds based on a lie. Holy smoke. It's just, man. This is Himes out of Connecticut. The mouth breathers on MAGA Hot Online are just going out of their minds based on a lie. And number two, the intelligence community is full of very good people who do their jobs every single day. It's So's the KGB. And now they're watching their leader do something that each and every one of them knows is dishonest. And it's really, really bad thing for the safety and security of the American people when that dynamic is out there. You see, they're pulling out all the guns. They know that Tulsi has the goods on these people, including President Obama. She has the goods. She has the documents. And so what are the Democrats going to do? Well, they have to pull out all the guns and discredit her as fast as possible. And then you're going, as I said earlier, you're going to probably see before this week is over, a whole bunch of heat coming out about Epstein and his list in order to cover this up. Then Himes says, and by the way, Margaret, if I may, you asked about the referral. Here's the test. This Epstein all over again. Criminal referrals. We're going to prosecute Barack Obama. You know that. All right. You know treasonous and seditious things. Here's the thing. And I hope that 4, 5, 6 weeks from now, don't take it from this Democrat. 4 or 5, 6 weeks from now, let's see if this administration, Tulsi Gabbard, accusing a former president of treason, let's see if they bring charges. They won't. They won't because there's not. Now, this is, listen to this. This is Himes, as I said, senator from Connecticut. They won't bring, he's saying that the Justice Department will not bring charges against Obama and this treasonous crowd because of this. He says they won't, because there's not a judge in the land, not a single judge who will treat this with anything other than laughter that will be heard from the Atlantic to the Pacific in this country. So the test of this is 4, 5, 6 weeks from now, is the DOJ bringing charges. Now, according to Himes and Warner, of course, nuclear war with Russia is not nearly as dangerous as exposing the traitors who thinks it's acceptable to put the survival of humanity in the crosshairs. So this is, I just couldn't wait to get on here this morning to talk about this. Now, I want to mention something about stupidity. I also want to mention, I think I have one open spot this week for, I'm taking care of K-Talk audience, the K-Talk crowd, for half price in my clinic through the month of July as a thank you. And saw many last week, from severe migraines to severe sciatica, scoliosis, 12-year-old scoliosis, several other problems. And it'll go through the end of the month. You call the office 801-523-1890 for an evaluation. If it doesn't look like it's something that we take care of, there's no charge. There's no charge for the consultation. We'll still be friends. You just go on your way and I'll go my way. But if it's something I think we can help you with, the initial charge is cut by 50%. And I know that means something to a lot of you. All right. I just wanted to mention that one more time. You call the office 801-523-1890. So when you look at these people, these Democrat leaders, and the people who were in charge of security, in charge of the military, in charge of the budget, in charge of intelligence, in charge of state affairs at the end of Obama's administration, and the goons who are coming in behind that, like Himes and Warner, trying to say that a Senate Intelligence Committee had greater weight in examining the narrative of the Russiagate collusion than our own Intelligence Committee, who has gathered the documents. Then this is way beyond Tulsi Gabbard's opinion. You don't call people traitors based on opinion. You call people traitors based on traitorous behavior. And you damn well better be able to prove it. And so she says, I have it. Here it is. Here's the documents. I'm turning it over to the Justice Department. Himes comes out and says, well, we'll find out how true this is in the next 4 or 5, 6 weeks, whether or not indictments come out. I mean, he says they won't. And they won't. Why? Because he says there's not a judge in this country who, looking at that information, will not laugh so loudly he can't be heard on the far sides of both oceans. Oh, such eloquence. Now, when Himes gets on there and says what he says, and Warner says what he says, and all of the comments about this are just beginning. There's going to be a lot more yet. You have to wonder how these people look at us. When that meeting took place there in December, where according to these documents, and there's no indictments yet, even though Himes says there won't be any. Same thing with, I mean, how many people have been indicted over the Epstein stuff? And poor Ghislaine Maxwell sitting in prison for something that didn't happen just breaks my heart. What about this? This is completely different. This involves the highest office in the land, involved with the most disgusting of traitorous behavior if this stuff proves true. What was going through Clapper's mind and John Kerry's mind and Susan Rice's mind and President Obama's mind relative to how and what we think? I mean, how do they look at us? What do they think when they look at us? That we're a bunch of idiots, that we're a bunch of useless leaders, that the average American is about as smart as a bag of rocks, and that whatever they tell us is the case is going to be the case? How much preparation did Himes go through before his meeting with Margaret Brennan on Meet the Press yesterday morning? And who do they think they're talking to? You remember when you were a young idiot. I remember when I was a young idiot, around 16, 17. Adolescent, immature, socially inept. You know, your average teenage idiot. And you might get involved in some cruel joke with some less fortunate fellow idiot in the class. You know, someone who wasn't totally altogether. Just really bad off. Just not as sharp as you. And you'd tease him. It was kind of an innocent teasing. And you'd kind of laugh and joke because of the naivety of this other person. And when I think about that, I always start thinking of Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci, every time he stood up with President Trump on the dais there for daily updates regarding COVID, he must have gone home laughing every night. Laughing at what he said in his news brief. Things like, well, now it's probably a good idea to wear 2 masks. And I can see him saying to his support group after that presentation was over with. Can you believe that? Can you believe they bought that? Can you believe the idiocy these people have? That they're now going to go out there and put on 2 masks? How stupid can these people be? I think Fauci has enough sense in his brains to put something like that together. I mean, do you have a better explanation of what's happened health-wise over the last 5 years in this country? You know, they must have assessment groups, investigative groups that constantly monitoring the American public mindset as to what they're willing to swallow. What can we throw at them next to get them to swallow and go back to paying their taxes and leave us alone? I mean, look at the JFK assassination. That was a lot of trouble. Setting up Oswald like they did, making Ruby the fall guy for Oswald's very strange death. Hiding the other shooters that were out there on the grassy knoll or that were down in the sewers. You know, they must have gotten together and talked about this, throwing out a bunch of ideas as to how they're going to get rid of Kennedy. Nah, we can't do that. Do you think the American public is stupid? No, we couldn't get away with something like that. And yet they did. I mean, you look at the moon landing. Another great effort on their part to make that it was believable. They even bothered to get a famous movie director to shoot on the moon footage, which was a lot of trouble, not to mention rather expensive. And it was, it's kind of like they got back together again for their afternoon brandies. Gosh, we pulled that one off. Well, just how stupid. Maybe some of this stuff is real. I mean, Kennedy did get shot. Maybe we sent men to the moon. Maybe they even landed on the moon. But it was too much trouble to actually film it there, so they filmed it in a studio instead. Anyway, we're coming to the end of the program this morning. I've got more to talk about this and be tomorrow, but boy, I can't wait to see what unfolds in the news between now and tomorrow. Now, I know you're not the stupid crowd. You're the smart crowd because you've been listening to alternative media for years, decades, like I have. I started studying this stuff in my early 20s, 50 years ago. I just couldn't put it down. I just couldn't read enough books. I couldn't learn enough. Some of what I learned, I have since learned is inaccurate, but a lot of it was true. That I try to present here on my radio show. I really appreciate being able to do this. I don't take this privilege lightly. And I treasure my friendship with you, my audience, during this time period. And for those of you who've become deep friends outside of my clinic and outside of the radio show. So once again, I've got half price off during the month of July for new patients. And I'm only offering this to the K-Talk crowd. All right, to my streamer friends. Of course, the same offer goes to you. All right, I'm going to end this. I'll probably pick this up a little bit tomorrow, but boy, I just can't wait to see what happens between now and tomorrow morning to talk about.